And we really, really do try with each episode to make it great. So we want it to be the best. There's no formula. Every company is different. Every journey is unique. And it's worth studying them.
Our guest today was David Rosenthal, co-founder of Acquired and Kindergarten Ventures. David, what did we discuss today?
We discussed everything. I mean, we discussed all the way back to Princeton, where we both went to school at different times. We discussed Acquired, everything that goes into Acquired, our episodes, how we make them, what they're about, the business of Acquired, how it all came to be, investing, the journey.
David shared behind the scenes, how he prepares for episodes, how Ben and David met, how they have this chemistry, advice for creators, what makes a great episode, structure and storyline, how to pick a company. Basically, like if you're a fan of podcasting and Acquired, this will be an amazing show. We discussed investing, especially with a focus on B2B SaaS. David shared his journey, some of the memories and lessons learned from Princeton, UBS, Stanford Business School. This was a really, really cool show. This episode will be super interesting for creators, founders, and investors. Welcome, everyone. Another episode of nFactorial Podcast. Our first episode coming from San Francisco. And our guest today is David Rosenthal, founder of Acquired Podcast and managing partner at Kindergarten Ventures. David?
Sure. That's as great as that. I never know what to call myself, but one half of the Acquired duo.
David, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Ahmad, for having me. This is so fun. What a beautiful set you have here. I get to see my city in a whole new way.
Yeah, we were just talking backstage with David that the intention today is to no less than record an Acquired episode for the Acquired show. We are missing Ben today, but hopefully he'll like this episode and we'll invite him to the V2. But this is a V1 of
You'll have to go up to Seattle to do that to get there, because we are a Seattle and San Francisco.
Yeah.
Get the whole experience.
Maybe we'll make
the other half up there
for sure. And that's the goal. We'll see how it goes. Initially, I was planning to focus on 3 chapters: so podcast, then investing, and then playbooks of successful companies. But then when I found out, once I did all of the prep, that podcasting piece is so big that maybe we will not have time for the other 2. So let's start from the kind of the father of all open-ended questions, which is, you are one of the first technology shows on Apple Podcasts, 350K monthly listeners. How did you make such a show, which is it really became a massive phenomenon here in Silicon Valley and all around the world among the sort of the tech community?
Well,
what's your secret?
Thank you for characterizing it that way. I appreciate it. A few things to say. One, we certainly didn't set out with that as the end in mind when we started. 2, we've been doing this a long time. We're about to enter year 9 that we've been doing this continuously, which, especially in this world of podcasting, I mean, podcasting has been around since, I think, 2005, 2006 is when it started, but it was so niche. I mean, we lucked out in that we started in 2015, which was right around when podcasting went mainstream. So we benefited from great timing, but just doing it for that long and believe me, for the vast majority of those years, none of what you just said was true.
What kept you going?
We loved it. We still do. I mean, there was certainly in the early days and for many years, this was just a hobby and something we did for fun, for Ben and my friendship as much as anything else. It was great that people listened and we got feedback, and that we started really small and then it grew over time, and that was cool. But it wasn't even a glimmer in our minds that this would be significant in any fashion, that it would be a business, our livelihoods, that it would have the influence that it's come to have, that would have the reach, that we would have the listeners that we have. All that very much surprised us along the way. And then we made lots of decisions to lean into it as it started to happen. But it was not the goal. The goal was, Ben and I were good friends, and he had the idea to start a show, and we wanted a good excuse to spend time together. And as we did it, we just really liked doing it and making these episodes. So we continued.
Mm-hmm. I started listening 4 years ago. One of my friends recommended. I became a instant fan. Listened to everything before 2020.
Oh, those early episodes, they're very different if you go
Pixar
back and listen.
and all of that, all the acquisitions. That's when I realized, oh, that's where the name comes from.
A funny story on the name.
Please.
So we called the show Acquired because originally the original premise, Ben's idea for the show that he pitched me on doing with him was, let's do a show about technology acquisitions that were successful, that went well. And I was like, oh, great, it's a good idea. But mostly it was like, oh, we get to hang out. We did that for, 15, 20 episodes, hence the name Acquired. And then we kind of ran out of them. So then we started brought in. Now we just tell the stories of great companies. But we kept the name Acquired, A, because we loved the name, but also B, one thing we might get into in this episode is the difference between podcast land and YouTube land. Podcast land is not driven by any algorithm. And so most people's podcast feed is just sorted alphabetically. So our name, ACQ, for most people is the top podcast in their feed whenever they open up their player.
That's smart.
It was not intentional, but we very much leaned into it.
What's your pitch for someone who's never heard of Acquired? How would you describe your show?
Yeah, I would say at this point, our goal, and I wouldn't say we always succeed, but our goal is when we impression of what that company is that exists in any medium, whether a podcast or a book or an audio book or a video or a movie or, in some of the companies we've covered now. We just did Nike recently when the Air just came out, a huge, Hollywood movie, blockbuster, hundreds of millions of dollars. Our goal is to tell the story better than anything else. Obviously, the production values are very different between us as an audio podcast versus Air with, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. But I would like to think, and it's particularly in that case, Air was a very enjoyable movie, but I think we told the story of Nike better than, which I don't think that was the goal of Air, to tell the story of Nike accurately, but that is what we try to do.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about sort of actually other mediums trying to tell the story. You have documentaries, you have shows like Air, you have, the horror, like HBS, like cases,
yep.
You have, the research reports from McKinsey. You have the articles or sort of deep dives from journalists.
Yep.
Mario Gabrielli,
yep.
You have...
Good else? Friend of ours. Great.
Yeah. You have, articles on Bloomberg. Where in the spectrum Acquired is?
Yeah.
What are sort of, if we do a sort of a 2x2 matrix, what are the dimensions?
I love it. This is great. So we didn't necessarily start this way thinking about it. Although if you go back to those early episodes, it really does follow the structure. I think the magic of Acquired that I think we get this balance better than just about anybody else is the 2x2 matrix is story and analysis. And there are lots of things that are really, really great at telling stories. Mm-hmm. Very few of those, like Air. Air is a really good story. The Air, the blockbuster movie about Nike. But it has no analysis in it. The analysis being, why did this work? The analysis being, why did this work? What are the lessons we can learn? Like, how can, if a really smart, interested, business-minded person wanted to study Nike, they want to learn lessons from it. So then on the other end of one end of the spectrum, you've got Hollywood and Air.
Great at story.
Great at story, no analysis. Mm-hmm. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got like a HBS, Harvard Business School case study, or a McKinsey report, mm-hmm. or a equity research report on a company. All analysis, zero story.
All numbers and charts.
Just a lot of numbers and charts. And the problem, to the extent that there's a problem, or the opportunity for us, is that those can and often do have great analysis, but they're really boring to read. Like, you're not going to go spend your free time willingly, unless you have an ulterior motive of you're trying to study a company, to go consume those. And so what we try to do is marry those two things, be world-class storytellers and world-class analysis. And to our minds, that's the only way you can really get a true understanding of these companies. I think it comes from us being, in the startup world, VCs, to a certain extent, founders and operators ourselves. The way I think most founders and people in a company think of their company is as a mix of that. It's like we have a story, there's provenance to what we're doing, but it's not just a story. There's also like, there's a business plan here. Yeah. And so we try to like capture the marriage of those two things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great fusion, and that's why I think you appeal to both left and right brain, and that's why it's so successful. Whatever, like if we were to, Amazonify your key principles and key features of your podcast, what would it be?
In like the elements of a show itself?
The elements of a show itself, yeah.
So I would say at the core of it is the marriage of those two things, story and analysis. And we dedicate the first and by far longest section of each episode to, we call it history and facts, but the story of the company. Now, it's not just story. We're weaving analysis in throughout the story. And then we also have a separate section for the last kind of quarter to third of the podcast that's just analysis. And again, it's not just analysis. We also weave story into that too. So the lines are blurry.
Very cool.
But our sort of promise to listeners in each episode and how we construct it is like, you are going to get story, you are going to get analysis. They'll bleed together. But we do the story first, and that's the longest because our feeling is like you can't properly analyze a company until you understand its story. So I say that there's plenty of other things. We've adopted Hamilton Helmer's 7 Powers framework. Hamilton has become a great friend of ours. He's a brilliant strategist, investor, a Silicon Valley legend at this point. He worked for Bill Bain at Bain & Company, way back in the day. He was a professor at Stanford. Hamilton was, and an investor. He started Strategy Capital. He wrote this book called 7 Powers about 7 elements of power, as he calls it, that a company can have. And power being, you could think of it sort of like a moat, in Warren Buffett terms. Like what gives this company the ability to earn outsized margins, outsized returns as an investor than other companies in its competitive set. And so we use that framework at the end of each episode, and we say, okay, let's run this company through the 7 powers analysis. What powers does it have? So there is some structure there too, but I think like, again, part of the playbook of the magic is we also are, to borrow like a phrase from Benchmark Capital, the VC firm, they use this, we're more of a jazz band than a marching band, and Acquired is more of a jazz band than a marching band. We don't necessarily paint by numbers. We'll blur things up, we'll riff, we'll do all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the trade-offs you're willing to make when producing a show?
Oh my gosh, so many.
What are the sacrifices?
So many. So
the two objective functions you're definitely maximizes is sort of story and analysis.
Yep.
What is being sacrificed along the way?
The big, trade-off sacrifice, I don't know how much you would call this sacrifice, but as a consequence of trying to, and we really, really do try with each episode to make it great. So we want it to be the best. We don't always succeed, like I said, but we want it to be the best thing about this topic that we're doing. That means that we need to really put a lot of effort into each. So we only do 1 episode a month, which in our world, we talk a little about this with YouTube. In YouTube, that would just be like truly idiotic. In podcast land, it's just mostly idiotic. Every piece of advice, every force aligned in the creator ecosystem is to publish more frequently. And we've done the exact opposite approach of that because we just can't do it. Like, I don't even know if maybe we could produce more frequent episodes, but it would kill us. Like, it's basically we're at the like the red line as is, because of the amount of work that we put into each episode. I mean, it's so there's no so that's one aspect, one underlying aspect of it. There's no team. Everything is me and Ben. We have amazing editor, Steven. Steven does our audio and video engineering. So when we record episodes, we ship him the raw recordings and he does magic to make it intelligible. But then we do all the content edits. Like all of the, our goal is that any intellectual property. And not to say that, true great video editing and audio editing is intellectual property. But beyond that, it's just the three of us. There's nothing else. There's no research assistants. There's no assistants, period. We do all our email. We do all our own business. We do all our own ad sales. We do all our own investing. We do all our own recording. We do everything. And that is very intentional. Fortunately, we're now at a point where we have the resources that we don't have to do that. But we've always, every step of the road, made the decision that, like, we could change that. We could bring people on. But we think that is going to make the show worse. And so with the objective function for us is always quality of the episode. And that means quantity is a trickle.
Got it. You talked about sort of the difference between YouTube and podcasts. What are the key differences in your mind? And sort of,
oh wow,
yeah. And do you have any intentions to enter YouTube or you?
Yeah, we're on YouTube.
Yeah.
So we do everything that we do winds up on YouTube in some shape or form. Most of the canonical story, we call them season episodes that we do that are just Ben and me telling a story and an analysis of a company, wind up on YouTube just in audio only format. So audio podcast is our primary medium. That is our hero medium. That is how we think about what we do. Posting on YouTube is a great additional channel for that. Now, when we get to do interviews, so we also do a fewer number every year, but we do 12 season episodes a year, once a month, where we pick a company and we do what I've been talking about. And some smaller number, somewhere between 6 and 10 times a year, we get to interview somebody really cool, usually related to one of the episodes. When we do that, we like to make it really special, like you're doing here, in a great venue, something special. And we do
benchmark episode was great.
We get to have dinner with the whole partnership, something like that. In those cases, we will record video. We want that also to be great. And then that's a full video episode on YouTube. The amount of production lift, though, to make that happen is so much greater, as you know, than just audio. So we are fully on YouTube. But for us, to the question about the difference of the ecosystems, although the nature of the media itself is pretty much the same, and obviously we cross-post what we do on YouTube and video, and it's an audio episode, the dynamics of how the ecosystem works are completely different. And the biggest difference is algorithmic versus non-algorithmic. So podcast land, this is changing a little bit with Spotify, but fortunately, at least for us, only a little bit. There's no algorithm that disintermediates, listener intent with what they consume. So stuff like acquired, spelling being ACQ and us ending up at the top of the feed, that's still the case in most of podcast land. There's no recommended feed of what you're going to consume next. So that means, to the trade-off discussion, for us and for this long journey we've had to get to this point, it's very hard, if not impossible, to go viral in podcast land. You have to build your audience up step by step, one listener recommendation to a friend at a time. There's not really anything that could become a step function change. The downside of that is obviously it takes a long time to grow. And, we're 9 years in, and our audience, I would say our number of subscribers is probably in the 350, 400,000 range. I would say our total audience, not all of whom are subscribed, are in the 500,000 range. After 9 years, in a social media platform, that's great, but that's not that impressive. But that's because of podcast land. In YouTube land, there's the algorithm. So, you do something, it gets picked up by the algorithm, you can get 1 million subscribers overnight. But the downside of that is that it's easy come, easy go, at least relative to podcasting. We feel very confident that our audience base, and of course we need to respect them and keep making great content and not betray them. But I think as long as we do that, in podcasting land, they will keep listening to what we do. In YouTube land, you never know what the algorithm is going to serve your audience next.
Yeah, so your podcast is sort of more Lindy robust. It took you 10 years to get there. It's unlikely that unlike YouTube channels, they're sort of less fickle and they'll stick.
Not to say you can't build great durable businesses on YouTube. You absolutely can. But think it would be very hard, if not impossible, to operate like we do if YouTube is your primary medium. You know, if you're only posting a piece of content once a month, maybe even less frequently, the algorithm just isn't going to pick you up in the same way, almost no matter how good what that thing is. So it's very much the medium for us, although on the surface they look so similar, like the realities for what it means for the show, for our business, are way different.
Tell us about the time when you met Ben.
Yeah. Well, we first met in Seattle. We ended up coming together because we both worked for Madrona Venture Group, which is the largest venture firm in Seattle. They were the first investors in Amazon, many other great companies over the years. Snowflake, they're now, Madrona's done so great. They're a wonderful firm, mostly because Ben and I left. No. But
you were there for 7 years. Right?
Yes, off and on, 7 years total, 2 of which I went to business school.
Gotcha.
But they sponsored me to go to business school. So I was gone from the firm, but I was coming back afterwards. So while I was in business school and in my second year, before I graduated, came back to Seattle and started full time, I went back up to visit during a school break or something, or maybe just for the weekend. I don't know. And one of Madrona's partners, Greg Gottesman, who now with Ben is a co-founder of PSL, he was hosting a Passover Seder dinner at his house. And I think also, you never know for sure. I've never directly asked Greg this, but I think he was subtly trying to think like, how can I recruit Ben to Madrona? Ben was at Microsoft at the time.
Interesting.
We both came over to Passover Seder dinner at Greg's house and, hit it off. I would say like, I definitely liked each other a lot. Like, oh, this will be cool. But then I still had to go a few months of school left. So I went back down to Stanford.
This was 2014?
This was 2014. Yeah, spring of 2014. And, Ben and I didn't connect again for a while. And then it would be, I think, even a while longer after I got back to Madrona that we ended up hiring Ben into Madrona Labs. And so then it was when we first were like in the same office, working together, seeing each other every day, that our friendship really, really blossomed.
Tell us about sort of in what ways are you complementary to each other, and sort of what's the. I mean, we as an audience would definitely feel the chemistry, but maybe if you were to break it down.
Yeah, well, I would say there's many ways in which we're complementary, which are very, very important. But I think a bedrock underneath that is like we truly are like best friends. Like there's not. We really like each other, and. That is so important, especially for something we've been doing a decade together now and want to do for decades to come. We obviously operate in startup land and, company land writ large, and like co-founding relationships that last in the measured of decades. Like, I think that has to be the case, no matter when you complement whatever your skills are. Like if there's not that baseline, I enjoy spending time with this person. It's like a marriage. It's not gonna last. So I think that's the most important thing to me for the two of us. But we also complement each other like incredibly. Like I am such an optimist, such a potentially wild optimist. If left to my own devices, I'm like, oh, things are all gonna work out. Like I come up with crazy ideas. Ben is not a pessimist. I actually think it maybe wouldn't work if we were a pessimist per se, but he's the much more sober one of the two of us. And the much more like, okay, like how's that really going to work? Like let's like think, but not in a like, and I think this is part of what makes our chemistry work so well, at least behind the scenes. He's never, and I appreciate this so much about him, he's never in a like, oh, that's a bad idea, I'm going to shoot that down, that'll never work. It's like, okay, how could we make this work? Yeah, it's not but. So in that way, we're kind of like a great improv comedy duo. It's always and. It's like there's never a but. So that's sort of personality wise, and then skill set wise. Ironically, I was the professional investor, the VC, and Ben was the operator at Microsoft, and then joining Madrona Labs, which was about starting companies within Madrona, and then starting PSL.
At some point, he was an iOS engineer, right?
Yeah.
He built quite a few apps.
He did, starting in college, and he built some great apps. He built an app called Seize the Day, which I think was like a early reminders app in the App Store. And, that went viral in the App Store, got millions of downloads. So, ironically, he maybe actually that is because of it. Like, we were sort of miscast in our original roles. You'd think I would be the analytical one as a professional investor, and he would be more the story inside a company. No, totally the opposite. I'm the story guy. He's the analytical one. So that that's very much the complements, and our roles have evolved to that. While I do analysis and he does storytelling, like, the story is my domain and the analysis is his domain. We think about it almost like, if we were sportscasters doing a sporting event, that I'm the play-by-play guy and he's the color commentary guy.
Interesting.
Which is, we're both critically important. It's not very fun to just listen to a play-by-play, and it's also sort of like disorienting to only listen to color commentary. So that's part of the magic. And then I think the last thing we'd say is just from a technical point of view too. Like, Ben is very technical and very in many domains. Obviously technical in a computer science sense. He has a computer science degree. I don't, although I took plenty of CS classes at Princeton before it got too hard for me. But he actually has been an engineer, product manager. So there's that element. I think that comes through in the show. But for us and what we do, he's technical in a production sense. So he had a theater background in high school, both as a performer, but also behind the scenes in tech and in stage management. And so he is our like on-site producer tech. All of the technical decisions, all of the platform stuff that we use at Acquired, our hosts, our software stack, everything, Ben drives all of that. He's got a massive Zapier, instance that powers a lot of our business. Whereas I have like none of that.
Very cool. Shared values, complementary skills.
Yes.
Sort of part of magic. Let's talk about the behind the scenes, the prep you do. I read the Fast Company feature, and then you talk at length about the prep, which sort of behind the Nike episode. Maybe some of the more memorable ones, kind of how the preparation evolved over the years.
We were just joking about this this morning. So there's a graph. Ben tweeted a version of it a couple months ago, and we update it all the time, of the performance of our episodes over time by a number of downloads. And it's classic exponential graph. Like you look at it at any point in time, and it looks like the first 2/3 of it, nothing was happening, and then it goes like this. But the crazy thing about those graphs is you can zoom in on any point in time and it always looks the same. It's just a question of the scale. Like, the same phenomenon is always happening. And we're joking that like it's actually the same with our preparation for episodes. Like it tracks 1-to-1 of like the amount of effort and preparation that we put into episodes versus the size of the show audience. So in the early days, I mean, you go back, you listen to those old episodes. I can't. It's just so painful. We would basically wing it. We'd set a recording date, be like, all right, tonight after work, we're going to meet up in a conference room and we're going to record Instagram. Or we're going to record
whatever we remember from 2012.
Yeah. And we were just, I'm sure we were making stuff up. Like, I have no idea what we were saying. There was no script. There was no minimal, if any, research. Literally just winging it. And from that, it's evolved to, now I think that David Lidsky, the author of Fast Company, did a great job, documenting us and our process. I mean, it is an all-consuming month-long cycle where, I at least am not doing anything else for a month except researching, reading every book there is out there, consuming anything I can about a company, talking to people in the company, talking to people around the company, everything you would expect. And then we each prepare documents, for me, and we don't share them in advance. For me, mine is, I call it a script it's a script of the story of the show. And those can be, in Nike's case, I think it was a 40-50 page long script. And if you were to read it, it's not like, it doesn't read quite like a book, but it's closer to a book than bullet points. Like it's, and I'm not saying
Very
everything
dense.
word for word in there, but like you could read it and it's pretty close to a book.
So the amount of prep definitely like went up. So it's sort of 60-hour work weeks for 4 weeks, roughly speaking.
No,
Or-
I mean, it's like there's no separation between work and life, certainly for me. And I think for Ben too. The way I experience it is it's a monthly cadence. So when we finish recording an episode, we're gassed, we're exhausted. And fortunately, it takes Steven, our editor, 5 to 10 days to turn around. We produce, like for Nike, I think we produced, 8-9 hours worth of like recorded material.
in one day?
In one day. Yeah, we do it all in one day. All one shot.
Last day of the month or what?
No, whenever we just pick a
whatever,
date.
we
Like
pick
there's
a date.
no,
Yeah.
whenever the date is that we're going
you
to
start at
record,
9 a.m.
that's
or-
the day. We usually set like the calendar at 10 a.m., but we're always scrambling to prepare. So like basically there's no end date. There's no end time. We've finished as late as 10, 11 p.m. at night. And we've started as late as like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just because
Lunch
we're
breaks,
scrambling. Yeah, not really though. I mean, a little bit. We'll occasionally be like, all right, I got to go to the bathroom, but like, we're just going. And the goal in that is to get as much down. Like if you think about like a musician, like laying down tracks, like we're laying down tracks. And so it takes Steven days to sort that into something intelligible. So we're just exhausted after that happens. And usually for a couple days, like not much is happening. And then there's some back end work when we get a rough cut back from Steven that's intelligible. Then we do a lot of work on like, okay, let's polish this up. Let's remove this content. Maybe we'll do some re-records, etc. We got to write the show notes. We got to get it all prepped for release. During that, call it 10-day period, we're starting to ramp up a little bit on research for the next episode, but not intense, mostly recovery mode, and then get the episode out the door. And then there's 2 to 3 weeks after the episode. So we just shipped our NVIDIA Part 3 episode about the last 18 months of NVIDIA. That happened on Wednesday. Today is Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Today's Thursday. So, we're mostly we're getting ready to ramp up into the next recording date, which is 4 weeks out at this point. So sometimes, depending on the calendar, sometimes it's a 6-week cycle, sometimes it's a 4-week cycle, sometimes it's a 3-week cycle. Those are intense.
Got it. Let's share some numbers when it comes to the amount of prep. How many books do you have to read? For maybe your most recent episode, how many interviews you had to conduct, and how do you know that's enough? How
It's
do you
never
know?
enough. Never enough.
Yeah.
Always. There's more that we could do, and this is why
But you have a deadline once a month.
we have a deadline, and really we have a forcing function of we sell sponsorships on a season basis. So we've committed to our sponsors that
12 episodes.
There are 12 episodes a year happening, rain or shine. And so that is an incredible forcing function for us. I always joke, if we didn't have that, we would totally just become like Hardcore History, which, Dan publishes like an episode every 2 years. That would become us if we didn't have the forcing function of we had to ship. So how much is it? The answer is never enough. But it depends on the nature of the episode. So Nike, there's so many books, so much history. I mean, I think I read, 10 books, give or take, about Nike. I didn't read them all like diligently word for word, cover to cover, but I probably read half of them, very diligently word for word, taking notes physically in the books, going back through those notes, transcribing that into, my script, into a doc, then massaging that into like a script that actually I would read that would make sense for our format. So that's kind of one extreme example where there's so much written history about a company. And we also talked to lots of people too. We talked to Scott Reams, who's the retired Nike corporate historian. That was amazing to get access to him. Then like the recent NVIDIA episode that we did, there's no book on NVIDIA, which blows my mind. There will be some soon. A number of great authors are working on them, but that's crazy. So there's no book. And we scoped this to like the history of the past 18 months. So very different research process for that. That was YouTube, watching all of Jensen's keynotes for the last 18 months and then going back longer than that. We also realized as we started the process that this really was half the story of NVIDIA recently, but the other half of it was the story of OpenAI and the pioneering of generative AI and everything that led to ChatGPT. So we're like, okay, we got to tell the OpenAI story. So then that led down a whole like articles, interviews, whatnot. And then especially for this, and this is becoming more a part of every episode, but for a recent one like this, it's talking to a lot of people. So we were so fortunate, like the access we get now because of what we do. We got to talk to Ian Buck, another illustrious Princeton alum, who was one of the original authors of CUDA within NVIDIA. He's been there forever, and he is the GM. He runs the data center business at NVIDIA, which is the most important business at NVIDIA. So we got to talk to him. So that was a big part of the research. And we talked to people who use NVIDIA's products. We talked to other people in the landscape. We talked to CEOs of AI companies. We talked to some folks at OpenAI. Anyway, yeah.
Gotcha. What do you think, what are some of your favorite required episodes, and what makes a great episode in your eyes? Like, how do you know that when you publish it, it's like, okay, I'm really proud of it, and versus, some of the episodes you're just like, okay, maybe we could done better, but we should ship.
This is a funny question. We get it a lot. I don't have an answer that you would maybe expect. I can't. They're literally like my children. And I know Ben feels the same way. I can't pick one. And there's also this kind of thing to it. Like, kind of like sticking with the kids analogy. Kids grow and change over time. Like what a kid is when a kid is a newborn versus a 2-year-old versus a 6-year-old versus a teenager. These are very different things, and you love them all equally, but like they're very different animals, literally. I feel that way about our episodes. So like you go back, you listen to some of our older stuff, even some of our not that older stuff. I think of it like, oh yeah, those were the toddler years of Acquired. Like this is the teenage years of Acquired. This is, like every time I go back and listen to something else, and like for this NVIDIA episode, I had to go listen to the ones we did before, of course. We only did those 18 months ago, and I'm listening and I'm like, man, these, like on a certain perspective, I'm proud of them and they were great at the time and all this stuff. But like, I'm also like, these suck. Like we wouldn't release these today.
In what way, when you sort of, in what ways are they deficient, and what sort of, how are you evolving as a podcast and storyteller and an analyst?
I think a great question. So specifically with those, in my experience recently re-listening to them, I think we have added a lot of polish in the last 18 months. I think when we did those NVIDIA episodes, the difference between then and now in terms of our like storytelling and analytical prowess, we've gotten better, perhaps a lot better. But the delta between where we are now and where we are then is not as great as where we were then versus where we were 2 years before then. What's changed a lot is our production quality ethos, and it's not just part of those are technical aspects. Working with Steven, he's truly world class. Him getting even better, us getting more in sync. But there's also just stuff like there's so many things in those episodes that we wouldn't let see the light of day now. Little tangent. We love tangents, but like they need to serve a purpose and be a point. Whereas like we would kind of let ourselves go, be a little sloppy. There's here's a funny thing that listeners have probably already picked up on. I laugh a lot. And I think it's a polarizing feature. So some people listen to me talk and they hate it. They think it's like chalk on a blackboard. Like this guy, like he's laughing all the time. He's laughing at his own jokes. Who does that? I just did it there. And other people love it. Like, oh, this is so endearing. Like I'm like talking to a friend. It's so great.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the second camp. Yeah, so kind of surprising.
But it is polarizing.
The first camp even exists.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. So in the past, we always are just like, yeah, this is what it is. Now, our view on it, collectively, the three of us who produce the show, and my view on it is like, yeah, this is what it is, but we should be strategic about it. So like in those old NVIDIA episodes, you go listen to them, it's every 20 seconds that I'm erupting in laughter. And we don't want to edit it all out and have it go to zero, because then the personality of me and the show and my element of it goes away. But it also doesn't need to be every 20 seconds. So that's gotten a lot better in the last 18 months. And then there's just other stuff like the scale of our ambition too. I think our first 2 NVIDIA episodes both clocked in somewhere in the 2-hour range. This one is just under 3 hours. We recorded for probably close to 5. And that's only because it's a part 3 covering the last 18 months. Like, Nike was a 4-hour plus episode. So, we're now like, no, we're not going to leave stuff out. We're going to tell everything that's important. And so that's amped up over the years.
Gotcha. What are your most downloaded episodes? Maybe top 3, top 5?
Yeah. Another element of compounding growth and exponential is it's always recent ones. But there have been a few outliers. So LVMH was a huge outlier for us. We did that in, I think, February of this year of 2023. And that, like, if you look at our graph, that's an outlier. That's a step change jump. What's cool is that's now a normal baseline episode.
Why do you think it's the case?
I think that was a perfect storm. And we had no idea that it was going to be, I think you asked a minute ago, do we know when something's going to be, a banger? No idea. That was, we're like, wow, this is kind of a boondoggle for us. Random, we're going to cover LVMH, multi-100-year-old conglomerate European, not a tech company by any means. And it really struck a nerve. I mean, I think what surprised us, there were 2 things. What wasn't necessarily a surprise, but I think what it initially piqued people's interest was there's an incredible human story here of the Arnault family and like what's happened. And these brands are so important to global culture. Louis Vuitton, there's a reason why rappers rap about this stuff, or, Dom Perignon, or like all this stuff. And it's truly global. It's not just limited to any one continent or geography. So I think that piqued people's interest. What surprised us, we were worried going into it. We're like, are we going to lose some of our core audience, in tech here in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco? Do people here in this city care about that stuff? And what completely shocked us was they were so hungry for it. And people wanted to learn about these completely disparate companies and industries and brands because it's not what they hear about in the tech echo chamber. And they're like, oh, I can learn these other lessons. Maybe they're applicable to what I do. And maybe like Silicon Valley famously, is like brand. What was brand? I don't think about brand. But I don't get all this CPG stuff. And I think we could bring some understanding of that here. So those 2 things really drove it. And then we kind of ran with that. And we're like, okay, well, let's do Nike. Let's do Costco. Obviously different, but both of those are bigger than LVMH now. So
incredible. When it comes to your listeners, if you were to describe who your listeners are, how would you do?
Yeah, I think I did in the Fast Company piece. David, the author, asked me the same question. I said, my mind, the listener is Ben, because I'm talking to Ben. And who is Ben? He's somebody who is super smart. That is one of our core tenets at Acquired, is treat our audience like they're smart, because they are. Super smart, cares deeply about understanding, wants to learn and grow, is building things, working on things, and partially wants to be entertained and loves this stuff, but also partially like, oh, what can I learn? How can I get better? How can I build? How can I grow? So in my mind, he is the audience, and that translates. Our audience is, so we survey our audience relatively frequently to get demographic data. I think this maybe sounds tough, but I think it's true. I think we have the most valuable audience in the world. There are other folks that have similar audiences, maybe the same. I don't know, we have the number one, but we're in a small set of the value of our audience is incredible relative to its size. So who are they? 23% of our audience are current founders of companies. That's currently. Another large subset have been founders in the past. Of that, 15%, either 15 or 16% of our audience are CEOs of a company. That's on kind of the founder running a company side. And that runs the gamut from I'm a bootstrap side hustle thing to I just got into YC to I'm Jensen Huang. I'm the CEO of a $1 trillion company. We literally have that whole gamut. And then we've got the investor side. And so roughly a third-ish of our audience are investors of some type. VCs are the biggest category within that, although that's rapidly shifting. We've got lots of hedge fund guys, lots of institutional kind of LP type capital investors, lots of global investors, lots of public markets. The aggregate, and again, that ranges all the way from like a summer intern up through, the highest levels.
GP,
of all these firms, and so those two. So those are kind of the first two segments, and then the third segment of our audience is people that are gonna, we think, future be those people on one side or the other, or maybe both. Lots of people do both, and that's all the way from students. This is really cool. Just recently we started hearing about this. There are a lot of kids that listen to the show, like kids. A lot of parents listen with their kids, especially the more recent episodes we've done. We did Nintendo, Nike, we did Taylor Swift a couple of years ago. Like, we get a lot of messages from people that are like, I listened to this with my daughter, driving to soccer practice. We talk about it afterwards. I'm like, this is incredible. And like, lots of college students, business school students, and then people working at startups, people applying to YC, people. I think a great use case for Acquired is we've done episodes in series on many of the venture firms. So we've done Benchmark, we've done Sequoia, we've done Andreessen. We'll do more in the future. I think a lot of founders, before they go pitch those firms, they listen to our episodes on them. And then we hear from the GPs at those firms. They're like, this is crazy, which is fun. So anyway, all that in aggregate, while our audience is far, far, far from the largest you could have out there, there's a lot of value in it.
Yeah, if you were to rank the podcast by the average, the sort of household income of their listeners, you would probably like be top 3 for sure. Yeah. Easily.
And I think what's cool, the way we think about it is yes, but you also think about the potential.
Correct.
So almost everybody who's listening and really engaging with what we do, they fit that mold of what I was describing Ben as, and those are people who are going to, do important things, and importantly for our sponsors, make buying decisions of high value business services.
Sort of high slope people. Over there, Y-intercept. When it comes to, the seeing Acquired in the wild, I don't know, maybe some fun stories you have. Maybe you were waiting in line, I don't know, at an airport, or you were, I don't know, anything comes to mind?
Yeah, this is sort of embarrassing and kind of vain, but it's super cool. Like, we like, again, we think our audience is amazing. Like, we want to know them. Let's see, fun ones. Just recently, Ben and I were in New York a couple months ago, and this doesn't happen as much in San Francisco or Seattle, and I think maybe because people know we live here, and so they don't. But when we were in New York, people know we don't live there. Several times a day, every day, we're just walking down the street, and people are like, "I love the show," like that was super cool. We got in an elevator in our hotel one night at like 11 p.m. We were coming home from a dinner, and we're literally just in an elevator in a hotel, and there was another couple in the elevator, and the husband was like, "Are you the Acquired guy?" And we're just, this is crazy. We're in Manhattan. Like, there's millions of people here. That was cool. My favorite one. This might be my favorite one of all time. That just happened this week. I went to my local, my very favorite local coffee shop in Noe Valley in San Francisco, Martha and Brothers. There's two of them. There's one on 24th, one on Church. I love the one on Church is close to me. And I love the people who own it and run it. I was getting coffee, and one of the owners was like, "Hey, last time you were in here, somebody came up after you left and was like, 'Do you know who that is?'" And I was like, "That's crazy." But anyway, it's fun.
That's how I saw you. At reunions last year.
Yeah.
May, and like you were with your spouse and the kid, and there's like, David, I'm a big fan of the show, and then we connected. We had a picture. Yeah, it's really cool. Really cool. When it comes to some of your famous listeners, you mentioned Jensen Huang. I saw a quote, sort of testimonial from Gordon. Joseph. Well, what's Joseph?
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Correct.
JGL.
Yeah, always like
Yeah.
mix up with his name. But yeah, anyone else comes to mind?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, like, honestly, our well, I feel bad naming particular people because they might not want it, but less that, but more. I don't want to make it sound like particular members of our audience are left out or not as cool or like as helpful as others. But one person in particular, we got to give a shout out to is Andrew Marks, who runs TQ Ventures in New York. His dad is Howard Marks, a famous investor who founded Oaktree. And we did an episode with the two of them last year or the year before. That was really fun. But Andrew's become a really good friend, and he is like our, again, lots of people we owe a lot to, but he helps us out so much. He's responsible, I think, more than anyone else for acquired episodes, the number of acquired episodes that he has facilitated, given us the inspiration to do and research. He's the one who suggested we do Costco. Costco is, again, recency bias, but going to be our biggest episode ever, is our biggest episode ever. He introduced us to Michael Ovitz for our CAA episode. Just super, such a great guy, and has helped us so much. And like just because he likes what we put out, and he's become a great friend. So that's been a super cool thing recently. Like, you're asked about the celebrity aspects of this, and like that's fun and it's cool, and I love it. I don't want to pretend like I don't. But one thing Ben and I are always cognizant of is like, we can get carried away with this too. Like we gotta stay focused. We gotta make the show great. All this only happens if we make great stuff, and only continues to happen if we make great stuff. And what's cool is in the last couple of years, thanks to folks like Andrew or Jensen and the NVIDIA team, and they're like, we can use this to make the show better. We get access to things that we can bring into the show that, these are super cool experiences for us, but like we can bring it into the show. We can talk to Ian Buck at NVIDIA. Like that can happen now, and then that can make a better show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your cultural impact. I mean, it's hard to describe it when you're in the middle of it, but when you talk to your friends, when you talk to your listeners, how would you summarize the cultural impact of Acquired over the years?
Oh gosh. 0 for a long time. So we try hard, like I said kind of a minute ago, to tell the most complete picture of a topic, a company, topic, person, whatever. And I think that's sort of always, this is how Ben and I are operated. That's what we want to do. That's the show we want to make. And obviously we live in have for a long time and live in an increasingly polarized world where like people have their agendas and there's a view on things and whatnot. And a lot of business media has become this way too. Less so than politics. Like we're not anywhere near that. But I think particularly in the last zero interest rate environment, bull market we were in, there's again, like I totally get it, but I think we were not immune to it too. But we always try and be balanced, and I hope that like that's. We try to be balanced. We try to be rigorous. We try to paint an accurate picture. And I hope that rubs off a little bit on folks. I don't know. That's more a hope. I don't know if that actually is an impact, but.
Gotcha. So sort of a nuance over the short form, sort of a 3 hour versus the TikTok, sort of a 10 seconds. Yeah, got it.
And that there's not like, there's no
depth.
There's no shortage out there, and nor has there ever been of like 2-minute, video to get rich or something like that. And we are the polar opposite of that. Like our message is like, there's no formula. Every company is different. Every journey is unique, and it's worth studying them. And a lot of people that resonates with and are now doing that with us. So like if we're bringing more of that to the world, then like I'm pumped,
Very cool. I mean, in many ways, I mean, your long form inspired us, like in the way we kind of do things. Sort of when I was doing podcasting back in 2011 and 12, I recently looked back my videos from Vimeo, 25 episodes back then, 30 to 40 minutes. That was the sort of the
and that was long.
Yeah, and that was long. I mean, YouTube only let you used to let you download only 15-minute videos, and I had to download sort of upload them on Vimeo. And so yeah, it's a different time, but now I'm so convinced that long form is the way to go, because I mean, the reality is so nuanced. You need some time to figure things out, and especially when you're talking to a guest, first hour is sort of warming up. The best insights come in the second, third, fourth hour.
Yep. Totally.
Did you listen to the Lex Friedman episode with Balaji? It's like 8+ hours.
No, totally.
I mean, I couldn't finish it, but anyway, that's sort of a.
I did listen to his episode with John Carmack, which I think was 5 hours.
Yeah.
That was great.
But it was great.
Yeah.
So many stories. Yeah.
And what's cool, and like this obviously works on YouTube too, but especially in podcast land, there's space for that. Like most people don't consume Acquired like sitting down, like they're driving, they're exercising, they're walking, they're doing the dishes, like but that opens up space for like nuance and long form.
100%. I mean, conventional wisdom used to be like, hey, people have no attention, this is TikTok, Jan. People like, the time is more important than ever, like make it 10 minutes, make it a minute. Yeah, but this is like the zigging when everyone is zagging.
Yeah.
Wonderful. When it comes to Acquired LP episodes, you interview some of the, you interview founders, you interview investors. What are some of your go-to questions, some of the questions you typically ask?
Oh, well, maybe it's worth a minute first on what that is. We changed the name of it from the LP show to ACQ2. It's an outlet for me and Ben. As we've put more and more effort into the main show, and we've become more and more precious about, there's people watching, listening, like I'm sure there's definitely a way to interpret everything I'm saying as like, these guys are freaking nuts. Like they think what they're doing is like so special. Like, who are these guys? Like there's a trap we could fall into of like believing all of this. And so ACQ2 with this second show is an outlet for us to be free. Take experiments, not prepare as much, in many cases not prepare at all, and just like run free. And sometimes it's not good. Sometimes it's amazing. And oftentimes we learn and get ideas, and some of that makes it back into the main show. So that's kind of the purpose of it. I don't know. I don't really to that vein. I usually don't go into those, maybe we prepare a few things in advance. Very rarely will both of us prepare for those. But we usually just try and go into it free and loose for no other reason than our own sanity. And it's a nice change of pace for us.
Got it. What's next for Acquired?
Oh, what's next for Acquired? Well, hopefully more of the same. Hopefully episodes getting even better. We keep dialing things up for better or worse. And I think there is we've got a virtuous cycle going now, like I've been talking about, where as we've now hit a scale in the last couple of years where it's significant, we get access to things that we can then use to make the show better. So more of that on the way. And, I think beyond that, we haven't talked at all about the business of the show. That's, fascinating to Ben and me, at least, because it's our livelihood, or at least it's my sole livelihood, 99% of my livelihood. On that front, we talked about our audience. We benefited from the value of our audience that allows us to sell sponsorships for, relative to our audience size, good dollar amounts. We've started to think more, as almost every creator of scale out there is, of like, okay, is there another or a different type of business model that we can either shift to or more likely layer on here. We talked about this with Fast Company a lot in that piece. The biggest scale example of this is Mr. Beast on YouTube and what he's doing with Feastables. And he had this great explanation of it in the interview he did with Colin and Samir of like, hey, everybody on the surface thinks like I'm doing Feastables and that creators should own their own businesses because like it's better economics. That's not actually why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I'm at a scale now, his videos get 200, 300, 400 million views. I'm at a scale now where not even the biggest companies in the world can afford to pay me a fair price for what the value of my media is. Like, what is Coca-Cola going to do? Spend their entire annual budget for the year for marketing on one Mr. Beast video? Like, no, it's just not going to work. And so I think the only way you can continue to scale, to be clear, we're not at Mr. Beast scale or anywhere near it, but some of those dynamics come to play for us too, are starting to come to play for us too. So I think the natural solution to that, as Jimmy Mr. Beast says, the only to scale that is equity and equity relationships with companies. Now, whether that's investing, whether that's, there's many ways to do that we haven't figured out, but we've always had a view with our sponsors that like, if we or they view this as they're buying a podcast ad, we've failed. Like we're not trying to make a podcast. They shouldn't be buying a podcast ad. Like this should be a partnership. And so over the years, that's manifested itself in us investing relatively small amounts in these companies that's one piece of it, but also like we do events with them. We do, we become friends with the founders and the CEOs. Their fundraising, we introduce them, we help them fundraise. Not like they fundraise obviously, but like we can be helpful in that because we have our relationships. We get to know people in the company. We do all hands. We'll have them on ACQ2 and chat about their business, various little things. But is there a way that we can make that, deeper, more formal going forward? Probably. So that's the big vector we're going to explore on sort of beyond just making the show even better. Like that's always number one. But number two is like, is there a continued evolution on the business side?
Mm-hmm. Let's double click on the business model. You have, the maybe a year ago, this tweet from Justin Kahn went viral where he says, first time founders think about product, second time founders think about distribution. I experienced that from firsthand, having built a lot of things which we had to force to the market and market never wanted. And now it's so true. I mean, you think about the distribution first and the idea when you are like Mr. Beast, or I mean, even when you have an audience, you have 100,000 people, and then you can sort of like think backwards. Okay, I have this audience, maybe it by gender, the age demographic, all of that. Then you can think of a product which will be really valuable to this group, and it's really it kind of deals with market risk when it comes to a product. So in a VC landscape, you have Not Boring, Packy McCormick.
Yep.
I was his reader from I would say like April 2020, like maybe like
super early when he was just starting.
Yeah, when it was one of the it was just starting. I remember reading his stuff. I still love and read his stuff. He's kind of branched out to a different kind of genre, but very successful.
Yep.
Build a big newsletter, 200K readers. Then you build a sort of step two. You build a venture fund on top of it. You have a generalist, follow the same
Mario's done the same thing. Yep.
20 minute VC, Harry Stebbings, kind of an audio podcast, and a venture fund on top. So you are doing it. So what you're doing at the moment is obviously helping you with deal flow. So the venture fund part is more or less there, right?
Well, okay, right now. So Ben is a general partner at PSL.
Correct.
They do their mandate. They do exclusively early stage investing in the Pacific Northwest. Mm-hmm. That is not the investing equity business opportunity for Acquired is not that.
Gotcha.
It's scaled market leading companies globally. Just given the nature of audience, but it doesn't lend itself to early stage well on many sides. The nature of the show and what we study are great companies. Thus, by nature, they're scaled. They're big. Now, lots of people listen who are early stage founders or aspiring founders, and they want to know how to get big, of course. But we're not really equipped from a content side and then also from a distribution side to work with early stage companies. Because let's say we've done this in the past. We take on a Series A or even earlier company as a sponsor. We then blast them through our megaphone to this hopefully highly relevant audience for them. They probably don't have product market fit yet. So what's going to happen? Not good things for them or for our audience that's going to come to them with a promise that we created, but maybe that company can't really deliver on that promise yet, or they don't even know what that promise should be. And then maybe that company pivots or goes out of business or something, and then what? So we've kind of come to that conclusion that actually early stage stuff is not a fit on any dimension. And then there's the investing piece. Given our workflow for how we do episodes and what we do, we don't have room in our lives to really be doing early stage investing where you need to go prosecute and meet lots of companies and spaces. There's just not room for that. What there is room for on the sponsor side and potentially also on the investing side is clear market leading companies in particular verticals that are highly relevant to our audience and the buying decisions that they control. And buying decisions could be writ large. I mean, there's a financial product, like a venture capital investment is a buying decision. It's not money's flowing the other way, but it's still a buying decision. So in those cases, we can really accelerate companies working with them. And so that's kind of where our minds are gravitating towards, and sort of some of what other creators are doing, in other spaces and even other folks in our space during the early stage. For us, at least, we're not sure that early stage, starting companies or whatnot, that actually is quite aligned with what we do.
Gotcha. I mean, B2B SaaS lends itself really well.
Extremely well.
Yeah, just a personal anecdote. We are a customer of Pilot. And how did I find
amazing.
about Pilot? Acquired. I actually used the promo code from back in 2020.
Attribution.
Yeah.
Great.
So, I can't read, but a lot of startups, when I know they use things like Mercury, they use things like, they use 20 plus different services for all kinds of things. They use venture funds, they use PitchBook, all kinds of, and so I think that is an ideal advertiser for you, right?
Totally, 100%.
And you can start a fund like Craft Ventures, or SaaStr. B2B SaaS, very, very focused. Makes total sense. Let's brainstorm on the kind of products which you can launch, other than I kind of guess the answer given how focused you are, but maybe acquired documentary. Will you make?
Oh yeah, I thought you were going with starting SaaS companies. I mean, because that's something we've explored. Ben's been part of Startup Studios, but I think that the problem that we come back to is that how do we bridge the product market fit gap? Let's say we start a SaaS company. We're here's some SaaS service that all founders need. Would be the amazing distribution channel for it. We should totally start that company or co-found it with somebody or whatnot and then plug it into Acquired. It would work great. As you know, starting a SaaS company and finding product market fit is not easy. You don't just snap your fingers. And so bridging that gap is every time we look at it, we're we don't see a way to do that. Not to say we never would do that, but we haven't found it yet. But on other products and other media things we could do, yeah.
Do you foresee a future when you produce a documentary?
So, things like a book, documentaries, television-like series on a streaming platform, even to a certain extent, what we do with YouTube, with video versions of the episode. These are all very much things we can do, and I think we could do them well. We have not done any of them yet. By simple fact, two things really. One, every time we look at it, we're if we're really gonna do this right in the Acquired ethos, we're gonna put a lot of effort into it. And there's just not more we don't have more effort.
More bandwidth.
Yeah, we're tapped out making the show. So again, we may at some point make a decision. You know what? We actually decide now is the right time to do one of those other things. So maybe we'll dial back a little bit on the volume of the show and do that. I could see that happening in the future. Maybe there's no plans of that right now. What's kept us from doing that thus far, and may always keep us from doing it, is one of the other natures, a little bit to the difference of YouTube and podcasting land, and we lucked into it. Wasn't strategic. Business model wise for us, every time we look at all these other mediums, we've never been able to paint or have anybody else, any potential partners, paint a case to us where it's more business and financially advantageous for us to do one of those mediums versus keep doing what we're doing.
Gotcha.
Which is funny because like prestige wise, a documentary, a book, all that you think is bigger. But when you get down to like, okay, how does the money flow in that? Like the economic splits that you have to do with the distribution, with partners, whatnot to do that, almost assuredly, like the financial return on our effort to do those versus continuing to do the podcast is way lower, even if it's a more prestigious medium.
No, it's so true. I mean, I'll just share my thoughts. I mean, we've been doing this for just 6 months or so. We have a pretty good pace, 2 episodes a week. And we like the repeatability of it. It's the same thing. You just show up, you do it twice a week, you record twice a week. But documentary is something you have to, it doesn't scale. It's like you have to produce something completely unique. And now you have to come up with an idea. Now it's it's just one-off product. To come up to do a documentary number 2, you have to do the same thing all over again. Yeah. So and that's, I guess, where.
Well, it's like even, we've investigated this a little bit. Like, let's take Hollywood, for example. Movies, very famous, successful movies out there that are made out of books. You could think of many of them. Well-worn trope in Hollywood. I mean, these movies make hundreds of millions of dollars. The authors of those books end up getting very, very, very little.
Unless you're Rowling. Yeah. J.K. Rowling.
Right. Unless you're producing the movie.
Correct.
But the ones that just sell the rights to the books, 2 things happen that suck. One thing, you get very little of the financial, rewards out the end of the waterfall in Hollywood, parlance. 2, though, you cede creative control. So like so many of these books, you watch the movie, it's like Air, like we were talking about earlier. You watch Air and you're like, that's not what happened. You have to let go of the reins and Hollywood takes over. And this is true to certain degrees, I think, in all of these mediums. Could be not true in the book land, but the reality is Ben and I are not writers. If we were to do a book, we would have to hire a writer. What used to be called a ghostwriter and is now become a real profession that, as people realize like, oh yeah, actually like Prince Harry didn't write that book, and that's a mainstream thing now. You don't have to pretend anymore. We'd have to do that. And like, can we do that? Like, I don't know. Like, on the one, that's the only way it could happen because we wouldn't be good writers. On the other hand, like, I don't know, like it's our baby. Like we don't want somebody else writing our story.
No, I mean, and every new episode of Acquired is like the biggest yet. So instead of like, so it makes sense. Like, where do you invest your time? Like in producing something which you are already masters of, and which is sort of riding on this exponential which you built over the years, as opposed to starting something from scratch.
Yeah. Now, the best arguments we've ever heard on this, and what may someday, if we ever do it, I think would probably be what changes our minds, is some of these things, if you do them, they unlock things. A book can unlock things. A movie can unlock things that you're just not going to get to. So like individually, it might be a bad decision, but it might lead to some other things. So like maybe that's the best argument we've heard so far, but it still hasn't swayed us.
I'm going to the All-In Summit in a few days. When do I get to go to the Acquired Summit?
Well, okay. So we had we did an arena show with PitchBook last year. Gosh, it was only last year. That's crazy. At the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, the big arena. There's an amazing life experience. Just truly amazing to get to do that. Like, the people were there, the party afterward. I was just like, it really felt like this is so silly to talk about because we're just like some nerds that like talk about business. But I've never felt more like a rock star in my life than we walked into the party afterwards and there were like a couple hundred people at a bar and it was just like, whoa, this is crazy. Anyway, so we got to do that. What we realized once we sobered up after it, we were like, well, this was an amazing life experience. And we probably want to do this again at some point in time. But one, everything's a trade-off, required a lot of effort to put together. And the pitch book team really shouldered most of the weight. So, they're incredible to work with. But even with that, required a lot of effort from us. It was a distraction from the main thing. Two, the more important thing, the actual episodes that came out of it. So we programmed it as an evening. We did 3 sections. We had our friends Mario and Paki on. We did an idea dinner with them to start. Then we had Anu Haraharian from YC, who was leading the continuity, their growth fund at the time. And then we did a kind of longer form, but still short form, because of the nature of a live event, interview with the CEO of Brooks Running, Jim Weber, the CEO of Brooks. And Jim's amazing. They're a Berkshire Hathaway company, all the great story, all this stuff. So we released those episodes after. We're like, nothing against those people. Those people are amazing. But just by the nature of what they were, they're not as good as for the consumer of the podcast. If you listen to our interview with Jim is so great. The Brooks story is so amazing. But because we had to record it within the constraints of an event, if we redid that episode with just us in Jim's office, it would be way better. And so we're like, gosh, we're compromising when we do this. So anyway, all that to say, I'm sure it'll happen again in the future, but it's not going to be a regular thing.
Got it. Where do you see Acquired in 10 years?
Oh, wow. Impossible to say because 10 years ago it didn't exist, and look at everything has changed in the interim. I guess I have maybe two, maybe 3 answers to that. One, I think I hope the most, truly I have no idea, and it'll shock and surprise me then. If you were to talk to me 10 years ago now and be like, we're sitting here having this conversation, talking about it, I'll be like, there's no way I believe you, So that would be amazing if that happens again in the next phase. The other side of it too is I hope we're doing exactly the same thing, we love what we do. And there's magic to it in a lot of ways, on the content side, on the business side. There's also magic to it in the structure side of it too. A great benefit that of what we do that again was unintentional, but we've made intentional decisions to keep it that way along the way, is it's just us. We have no other stakeholders directly in the kitchen of Acquired, so to speak. We've got our audience, the major stakeholder, but nobody else is a shareholder. We don't have any employees per se. We've got Steven, but there's no team. That affords Ben and me just a huge amount of freedom that most people don't get to experience, because either you're working in a company where you're an employee and there's a literal and metaphorical contract that comes with that, or you're a founder of a company that takes investment, and then you've got shareholders, you might have a board, you've got other stakeholders. You can't just do whatever you want. Ben and I are in this magical position where structurally we can do whatever we want. And that's huge. I mean, you probably feel this way a little bit too with, every creator, once you get a taste of this, you're like, oh my gosh, there's risks and there's anxiety that comes with this, but it also you could never go back, the freedom is amazing. So I hope we don't lose that freedom. And then maybe the third thing, my third answer is I hope we can do both, achieve 1 and 2, and maybe also dial down the amount of pressure we put on ourselves a little bit. I mean, I think that's the dark side. It's not that dark, but the dark side of everything we've been talking about is we do feel an immense amount of weight and pressure on each episode. And I think that makes everything better and that drives us. But it'd just be like nice if it were like a little, why would like we do ACQ2 to have a release valve and like, I don't know, maybe if we can find a way to get to like, we have our cake and eat it too, of like make things great, but maybe not as much pressure.
Got it. Let's talk about investing. You were a venture capitalist before starting Acquired. When you started your own fund recently. What is the hardest and easiest thing about venture capital? Let's start from that.
Well, that's easy, is making the right investments. And the biggest piece of that is getting access to make the right investments. And that is both in I believe this about the industry, and that is in my lived experience, both the hardest and the easiest thing.
When you're a solo capitalist or you're starting a micro VC fund, how do you get access to great companies? What's your advice for an aspiring sort of solo capitalist?
I tried this. So, let me back up one step just to explain it being the hardest and the easiest thing. Mm-hmm. When you're investing, that's what you're doing. You're investing in other companies. Like the performance of those companies and of that investment, that's all that matters. Nothing else matters. That's it. And while I don't at all want to say investors can't help inflect the trajectories of companies, they absolutely can. And the best investors do the best at it. Even the very, very best investors, the amount of inflection that you are going to create for a company versus what that company is going to do itself and the founders and the employee base, like it's small potatoes here. So thus, the most important thing is the investment. And again, that's not to say that there's not work that happens after all that, all that of course happens, but like the most important thing is invest in the right companies. Now to your question of how do you do that and how do you do that as a new firm, like that's the hard piece. And the unfortunate reality, and one that I, lived, and most people who try to do it also live, is you can't. You just can't. Like the best firms and the best investors have the top brands. Brand is the most important power in venture capital. It's the only one that really exists, and that's if you're starting a company, you've started companies, you've gone to YC, like, do you want Benchmark to fund you, or do you want XYZ No Name Capital to fund you, or some brand new fund? Like, of course you want Benchmark to fund you, of course you want Sequoia to fund you. Of course you want Andreessen to fund you. And so ultimately, like that question that you got to answer of like, how are you going to beat them or overcome that problem? Because it's a limited universe of the best investments out there. For most people, and for a long time for me, they're only, when you really, really boil it down to, the thesis that they're betting on for that is luck. I'm going to luck into finding something or getting access to something that for whatever reason they miss or they pass on. That happens. Luck exists, but that's not a good or repeatable strategy. And I think for most people, firms and started, like almost nobody has a good or repeatable strategy for that. Acquired was this thing that Ben and I started as a hobby. It was never intended to be anything more than that. Mm-hmm. However, over the years, it became our answer to that question, or my answer to that question. Mm-hmm. And the only one I've ever had that actually works.
Got it.
And there are a bunch of dimensions to it, but like, at the end of the day, luckily right now in the scale we're at and everything we've been talking about, the value of Acquired changes the dimension for getting access to investments. So yeah, great to rewind all the way back to when I was in business school. Andy Ratcliffe, who was one of the founders of Benchmark, he was one of my professors. He co-taught a class I taught. He usually teaches one class just himself. My second year, he had to go back full-time to Wealthfront, so he didn't teach that class, but he co-taught another class and got to take that. And he would phrase this, and I think he's so spot on, of like, what I was saying, like, you got to answer that question as an investor. Why is a top company, a great founder, a promising founder going to take your money? And he's like, every answer to that is unique. Every single one. Mm-hmm. But most are not good. And so you really got to be honest with yourself and ask that question of like, is my answer to that at least good enough to be viable? And like I said, there's no playbook for it. Lots of different recipes to succeed, but like that should always be the crux of your question, the crux of the question, and of thinking about your own opportunity as an investor in startups and private companies.
When it comes to your own fund, what are some of the criteria you have for the companies? What's your average check? What's the typical round you're participating in?
Yeah. So, for me, for right now, Kindergarten Ventures is a fund. I run it with my friend Nat Manning. He's the co-founder of a company called Kettle, which is a great insurance company, reinsurance company, actually. They're an insurance tech company, but they also are actually a reinsurance company, which is sort of crazy, but it works, like climate insurance. And we run it together as partners. It is a side project for us. For both of us, we are very full-time doing our other things. And so that enables, and we can get into the dimensions of what that enables around the questions I was just asking. But to answer your question specifically, we invest at all stages, early, mid, late. Nat, due to his networks and his proclivity and what he likes, he mostly does early stuff. I mostly do not do early stuff for everything we were just talking about earlier. So I do mid and late stage stuff. Companies like Vanta, companies like Modern Treasure, usually companies we have an acquired relationship with, but sometimes not. We usually, we can write checks as small. I think our smallest ever was like $25K. We can go up to 9 million is our largest ever. We invested in Vanta. We did that via an SPV. Usual check size is a couple $100K as part of a round. We don't lead anything. Mm-hmm. That's an important dimension.
No board seats. Yeah.
No board seats.
Mm-hmm.
It's not good for companies. It's not good for us. We don't want it. And also, we don't want to set price. We don't want, like, there's just not. So part of that strategy, part of our strategy at Kindergarten too, is like, there is enough value that we're bringing for us to invest small pieces of rounds that we don't have to fight the Sequoias, the Andreessens, the benchmarks. Our answer to the question of how we're going to beat them is we're not going to beat them. They're going to bring us into the deals because they want us, because we can help add something to the mix, the investor base, by virtue of being part of it.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to kind of making the investment decisions, so you have great deal flow. I mean, acquired opens a lot of doors. What companies do you typically invest in?
Yeah. Well, for my side of things in Kindergarten, it's really just over time become more and more streamlined and merged into the companies we work with unacquired, our sponsors. It's that fit of like usually B2B companies, growth stage, either clearly are or are emerging as the market leader in their space. The space exists. Product market fit is no longer a thing. There are lots, or no longer a question. There are lots of customers. Things are happening. Like, none of that needs to be discovered. We can plug them into acquired, get wide exposure to them. And now, importantly for acquired and how we think about it, there's customer exposure and revenue, and that's the most important thing, of course. But it's not just that. Like, for the nature of who our audience is and for our sponsors and companies we work with, getting exposed on a regular basis and hopefully on a deep and engaging way of how we do our sponsorships and ads. We're not just like slinging ad copy here. We, integrate it into the episodes. That them being top of mind as they're hitting this scaling, market leading inflection points is helpful beyond just revenue. It's raising their next rounds. It's investor sentiment. It's public market investor sentiment. It's LP sentiment. It's employee sentiment. It's recruiting. It's all that, it's, too, you've been, in this world, you've been through YC. There's this thing that happens with companies around that stage where, like, before a certain point, you're a fish in a pond, like nobody, you're like, oh yeah, cool. You work with, the founders are like XYZ, you did YC, maybe benchmark back to you, so something like that. But it's not about the company. And then at a certain point, this sort of like magical switch flips for a company where the company becomes a thing. It's like, oh, you work for Stripe. Oh yeah. Oh, the Stripe Mafia, like there's like a mythology, and this is what we do on Acquire. Like this, we tell the stories of companies. And so like, I think, when we're operating at our best for our sponsors, for our business relationships and for companies we invest in, like we are helping accelerate that switch flipping where you go from like a startup of like, oh, you're a Sequoia portfolio company to, oh, you're Stripe. Oh, you're Airbnb. Oh, you're, what have you. So hopefully for hopefully that's Vanta. Hopefully that's Modern Treasury. Hopefully that's like, if we can make that, I don't want to say we can make that happen at all. Like, again, the companies make that happen. But if we can make that happen 6 months sooner, 3 months sooner, a year sooner, like that's great. That's real value that we can provide. And again, hopefully that translates to revenue too, but it's so much more than revenue.
In one of your testimonials, I wrote that one of the founders, when he was raising $100 million round, the LPs he was pitching to, they were like, not the LPs, the venture firms, venture firms that he was pitching to. They were like, oh, I mean, I heard of you. I mean, I heard of you from Acquired, and I think this sort of that's I'm pretty sure it happens quite a lot. I mean, now you are. When you are not a no-name company, you are part of this, as you said, part of this.
So a great, hopefully will become a great case study in this. Mm-hmm. One of our current sponsors is a company called GoOne, which is based in Australia. I love these guys. Andrew, the CEO, he's amazing. He was a Rhodes Scholar from Australia. Like their story is great. They just acquired Blinkist. They acquired Blinkist, so that's why Blinkist is one of our sponsors now, because GoOne acquired them. GoOne was a sponsor, and then they acquired Blinkist. And we're like, oh, well, then integrate Blinkist too. Mm-hmm. So GoOne. They started the company in Australia. They come over here. They do YC. It's like 2016, maybe 2017, something like that. Mm-hmm. And they do YC. They're one of the hundreds of companies that do it. They go back to Australia. They fall off the face of the earth. Everybody in Silicon Valley, the zeitgeist, everything we've been talking about, like gone. Doesn't exist. GoOne, never heard of them.
Yep.
Who are their investors? What did they do again? Whatever. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, they're plugging away. They've built like a $200 million ARR company in Australia, and they've got great investors. Microsoft's an investor, Salesforce is an investor, SoftBank was a big investor, lots of other great VCs. Madrona's an investor, but nobody knows who GoOne is. So we can really help that. Like that's what we're here for. Like this is a great company. It's a market leading company. They do corporate learning education, like aggregate content. So like, you could think of them like they call themselves the Spotify for business content. Mm-hmm. They go do deals with, Spotify does deals with artists, artists sign up to be on Spotify or whatever, podcasters. They go do content deals with Harvard Business Review, Udemy, any source of like corporate learning or business content out there. Mm-hmm. They aggregate it all. And then they go to big enterprises and they say, you don't want to go do licensing deals with these individual, piece content providers directly. Just do one master agreement with us. You get access to everything. It's literally like Spotify. You get all the music in the world. Mm-hmm. Just do one master agreement with us. Mm-hmm. And great company, 200 million ARR, roughly give or take. Mm-hmm. That's a perfect partner for us. So we Kindergarten invested in the company. They're one of our big sponsors this season. Hopefully that leads to great things and helps, it's doing things like this too. Like I'm talking about GoOne here. Like, I think they're a great company. Again, I'm not saying that like, I'm just shilling them, but like for a certain set of companies, it's harder, they'll get there on their own eventually. We're not doing anything that's going to fundamentally make or break the company. But like if they can get faster to like, oh, hey, the global business and tech community is aware of them, maybe they can IPO faster. Maybe they can get another round. Maybe these things can start to happen.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to B2B, let's kind of have some words of advice for an aspiring B2B founder. You invest in quite a few B2B companies. You some of them sponsored are acquired sponsors. Maybe some of the playbooks, the common themes among the most successful ones, and what sort of separates a successful B2B company over someone who is not so successful?
Ooh, wow. Well, if I knew that, I'd be a full-time VC, not a podcaster. No, I mean, I think a lot of these things, it's kind of, this is probably going to sound like standard YC advice stuff, but there's a reason why it's standard. It works. I think in B2B, there actually is an element just like in B2C of like, if you start with something that's kind of overlooked, Vanta is a great example of this. Vanta SOC 2 compliance. Like, what's that? Who cares? That's like a services thing. Like audit firms do that, whatever. Nobody really cares about it. It's just a check the box. Well, turns out it's a check the box that just about every enterprise in the world needs if you're going to do business with other enterprises. And you're like, well, is there a software way that we can automate this workflow? We can turn that into a platform. Like, oh yeah, turned out that was a multi-billion-dollar idea. And Christina, when she started the company, she had worked in VC. She had been at Union Square Ventures. She was an analyst at USV. Then she worked at Dropbox. And then I think it was while she was at Dropbox that she got exposed to this SOC 2 thing, and was like, oh, I'm gonna start this company, And so they, another example, they this was like, who cares about this stuff? She raised a seed round. She did YC, raised a seed round, and everybody forgot about her. Everybody forgot about the whole category. And a couple of years ago by, she bootstrapped to, she raised the seed round, but hadn't raised a Series A or any more capital, had 10 million in ARR. And it's like, oh, yeah, now it's a thing. Then they go raise a Series A from Sequoia at a $500 million valuation, because it's basically a growth round that she bootstrapped to. We start working with them. They become one of our marquee sponsors on the show. Like, now everybody knows Vanta. There are billboards all around the city about them. Like, so that's a playbook that definitely works. I think there's also like, this is sort of in startup realm. One of the things we've learned from the companies we cover on the show that are business to business, like a NVIDIA or, Microsoft. We haven't done canonical Microsoft episodes. We need to, but we've talked about them a lot. If you want to be like one of truly the world's greatest companies in the B2B world, you got to become a platform. And that is and you're going to become a platform in the technology world. You need to be a developer platform. And that is a decades long journey building out, there's got to be a computer science based opportunity of a tech shift that's happening. For NVIDIA is the transition to accelerated computing and GPUs. For NVIDIA, that was the transition to accelerated computing and GPUs and everything that is now necessary for AI. But the stack that you got to build to do that, CUDA's stack, software stack, NVIDIA's software stack, CUDA, that's, they make the chips, NVIDIA makes the GPUs. Then they make the drivers for the GPUs. They make the compilers. They make the programming environment. They make the programming language. Then they make the software libraries on top of it. You think about Apple and iOS and like ARKit and like all the kits and stuff that Apple provides, developer frameworks for developers. These are tens of thousands of person years of effort that go into that. But that's how, if you can build that and get a platform, then that's Microsoft with Windows. Then that's NVIDIA with CUDA, then that's the Apple ecosystem. Almost none of those companies can start that. You got to grow into that, right? Like in the startup phase, in the private company phase, it's Microsoft making, DOS. It's NVIDIA making gaming graphics cards. Like you gotta grow into that. But like to truly become great, you gotta bridge that gap into becoming a platform.
When it comes to investing frameworks, you mentioned 7 Powers. Any other investing frameworks which come to mind, which are generally used by venture capitalists? I know, non-consensus and right. I don't know. Anything else comes to mind. I don't know.
Oh, that's a great one. The non-consensus and right, which I think actually might be a Howard Marks thing that benchmark and
popularized by.
That's a great one. I think for me, I just think sort of practically about this stuff, and just always coming back to that question for me of like, why, and not, there's why for the company and, all that. And like, that's what you got to do. But like anybody can do that. Why am I getting to invest in this company?
What is my value add?
What is my, you can think value, I did like value add. That's sort of a company, whether you value add or don't, like, what is my edge? What is in a competitive private market, like venture capital investing, where there is plenty of capital out there, even today, you have to, it is a zero-sum game in that regard. You really got to ask yourself, why me? Now, public markets, totally different animal that I don't even pretend to have it. I think if I had to guess, I think the edge you can have there and how you need to think about things is duration, and duration mismatches in the public markets. But in the private venture markets, like, why me? That's the biggest question.
Let's talk about your journey and some of the memories and lessons learned along the way. Let's start from Princeton. Maybe some of your favorite classes from college.
Oh my gosh. Well, Ed Chow's class. Did you take Ed
Yeah,
Chow's?
I did.
Yeah. So great.
ELE 491.
ELE 491, high tech entrepreneurship.
Did you what company did you write your final piece on?
Oh my goodness. I think I wrote about Akamai. Yeah. Which was a good company, especially back then in 2007 to write about. And I think, I was not a good student in college. Like, I was very lazy, including in Ed Chow's class. Like, I don't think if he remembers me at all, he remembers me as a poor student. I think I did okay on the final paper because I picked the right company, but it was not a well-written paper.
You remember your midterm paper, perchance?
Oh, no, I don't remember what I did.
What
did you do for?
So the midterm paper, you had to interview a scientist.
That's right.
Well, a researcher, and then analyze whether this can be commercialized. This research can turn into a company. I remember I was talking to a grad student in computer graphics department. He was doing a reverse image search. You search an image. Well, it's sort of like it's a kind of a
AlexNet.
Yeah, it's like standard feature in Google in this case. You can upload an image and it shows you all the relevant images. And I was just this kind of, I don't think my analysis was that good, but I don't even remember what I wrote. But my final one, I remember, I wrote a sort of the case study for 37 signals.
Oh, cool. Fun. Oh, that's really cool.
And actually that paper forced me to write my first cold email. And that sort of...
To Jason?
to DHH.
Nice.
David Hansen. And he replied.
Did he respond?
He responded. And that's sort of like when I discovered that cold emailing is actually a great way for college students to write to people you admire.
So great. So did Tim Ferriss still come to the class when you took it?
He did. I actually went to... I even went. I used to go to as Ed chat. I mean, one of Ed's kind of mottos is that once you lean 491 for every sort of high tech entrepreneurship student, you can always attend the classes from our semester. So I actually went to maybe 2 or 3 of
Tim's
lectures by Tim, and there's the kind of in the spring 2011, he was accompanied by a New Yorker journalist who was writing a piece on Tim. So back then I was into Taekwondo and martial arts. So I approached him. I always it's been a while. I think I met Tim four times or so. I always approach him in Japanese. That's my go-to thing. I took Japanese for 2 years, and so I basically strike a sort of this kicking pose, and then I don't know. 4 months later, I see a New Yorker piece which says a student from Kazakhstan, and then describing that kind of. They did the fact checking. They wrote an email to me a month before that piece asking where I was from.
Wow.
Just to, we didn't even name anyone, but just to make sure that they
The New Yorker is really serious. They're one of the few publications left that are really serious about this stuff.
Anyway, sorry, going back to some of your classes.
Oh, no, that's so cool. I love that story. Part of the reason I bring it up is that, so my semester, I did spring semester, last semester, senior year, that I took Ed's class. And when Tim came, this was spring 2007. This was... before as the 4-hour work week was being published. It was literally coming out that spring. It hadn't come out yet when he came, and he was like, I do this supplement thing, and I wrote this book. It's going to come out soon. Yeah, Brain Quicken, exactly. And I remember at the time thinking this guy's nuts. Why didn't Ed bring this guy back? You know, and now full circle, here I am, a podcaster. Like, you know,
Yeah, that's so funny.
So funny. Yeah, that, you know, but for me, other than that, you know, that class was super impactful.
You should do a CQ2 episode with him at some point.
Oh, that'd be super fun.
Yeah.
He's still alive, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ed is alive. I think he lives in. Let's see. I think. Okay, I might.
He was in Montana for a while, right?
I think he's still. I emailed him maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and Tim interviewed him like 3 or 4 years ago as well.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's
so,
right.
former figure skater.
Really?
Ed Chow is a former.
I forgot that.
Yeah,
wow. He's an
Nationals.
amazing dude.
Yeah.
Amazing dude. Congressman, all sorts of things.
You should have him and Tim on the CQ2.
Together. That would be super fun. Oh, that would be that would have to be an ACQ2 episode.
Yeah.
But that would be so fun. Let's see. Yeah, so that, and then I think lots of other classes were great too. I took basically the up through the 200 level of the CS curriculum, and then I was like, well, this is too hard for me. I can't, you know, I was a lazy student.
So you took 217, the C programming one?
Yep.
126?
Took loved 126. I got an A or an A plus in 126, and then I think I got a C or a C minus in 217. And that's when I was like, and we're done here. You know, like, don't have the talent for this, or at least that was the story I told myself.
You studied history.
French literature actually
French
was my major.
okay.
Yeah. So the French department was great. I loved the folks. It was a super small department. I loved that.
Full circle, LVMH.
Yeah, exactly.
Did
So
you
I did
read
some stuff in French. Yeah.
That's
super
amazing.
fun. But you know, for me, the Princeton was. I don't know if this was an experience for you. For me, at least, I worked so hard in high school to get there. You know, and like. Everything leading up to high school, and like by the time I actually got there, like I was exhausted, you know. And so like I when I say I wasn't a good student, I was an okay student. I forget what my GPA was. It was like above 3, but maybe not that much. I was like, I'm gonna focus on other parts of my life here, you know. Like I got in the door, and like I need to take the foot off the gas a little bit. So it was all it was the friends, it was the extracurricular stuff. It was the clubs I was in, the sports I played. I met my wife there. We were both in Body Hype, one of the student dance companies there. That's how we met. You know, some of our best friends to this day are from that. So that's when I think back to like it's the whole experience, of which academics were, you know, part of it, but not. Princeton probably hates me saying this, but I don't think I was, in any way. To lots of people, and lots of my friends were great students and took it very seriously. But for me, I just needed that time to relax a bit.
Mm-hmm. How did you get into venture capital? Like from French literature to
it was Ed.
It
was that class.
Really?
When I took that class, and you know, betraying a little bit of my mindset at the time here too. The reason I signed up for it and took it was I thought technology was cool, but like. I heard it was an easy class, you know, and like I wouldn't have to work that hard.
Right.
And so that's why, you know, that was at least as much why I signed up for it.
Accounting test was super hard for me for some reason. They had some midterm accounting test.
That's right.
I don't remember. I that's when I realized like, wow, I mean, that's not for me. Anyway.
It's funny. Just like I realized systems programming wasn't for me either. But it was in that class where I was like, you know, I'd always loved technology, and I took computer science classes because I was interested in it. And I love computers, but it didn't occur to me that this was like a thing, that computers were a career, that technology was a career. And I never heard of venture capital in my life until I took that class. And then I was like, oh, wait, Ed, so you're telling me that these entrepreneurs who start these companies and, you know, they do this stuff and that's cool. But then there's these other people who get to just talk to all these entrepreneurs and like, give some of the money, and like, but that sounds really fun. Like I want to do that. So that was the start of it.
And you went to UBS?
Yeah. So I did investment banking right after school. I had already had my job lined up at that point in time, and now they recruit years in advance, which is criminal. But recruiting happened in the fall, so I had already had job lined up. I was going to go do that, and then during and after Ed's class, you had to, you know, preference what groups you wanted to be in banking, and I had no idea before, but I was like doing that. I was like, oh, I want to be in the technology, media, telecom group. Like I want to do TMT banking, and maybe this will be a path in, and it did, and it was. So I was in the TMT group at UBS, doing mostly media stuff, which again, ironically, now full circle, but also tech stuff. And that was the entree.
You had some time at StartX. What was your role there?
Yeah, that was when I was in business school. So StartX was and is a incubator on the Stanford campus for companies being started at Stanford. It's now bigger than it was then, but it was early days. And when I was in business school, I sort of had these academic institutions, they probably hate this about me, but I sort of viewed my two post high school academic experiences of undergrad at Princeton and grad school at Stanford as times to take the foot off the gas, shall we say, and especially in business school, I was like, oh, my foot is fully off the gas on classes were not a focus for me. The experience was a huge focus, even more than undergrad. I was like, Madrona's sponsoring me to go to school here. I know I'm coming back to Madrona afterwards. If I get kicked out, Madrona will take me back tomorrow. I am here to get the whole experience and further my career, not to study for classes. So StartX was a big part of that for me. I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's a incubator here on the Stanford campus. I was and will be a venture capitalist. Of course I'm going to get involved in this. So that was great. It was a small organization at the time. It was in the AOL building on Page Mill off of campus. Always smelled like a swimming pool for whatever reason. In part two, StartX was also where I got my start in what would eventually morph into Acquired. And one of the things I did, I think there were 7 or 8 of us that were on the StartX team that were helping run the program, and then the companies were in the accelerator, and we were all part-time. We were students. I guess a couple of people were full-time, but most of us were part-time students of various parts of Stanford. And one of the things I did was when we would have speakers come to the cohort and do, we did, I can't remember if it was Tuesday or Thursday, kind of modeled after YC's weekly dinners. We would do a similar thing, and then we would have a speaker come, and I was the one who prepped for and then interviewed the speakers. And so that was sort of my first experience doing something like this. And I just loved it. And probably was part of when Ben came to me with the podcast idea, why I was primed to be like, oh yeah, that sounds like really fun. I think I'll enjoy that.
Very cool. You joined Madrona in 2010. How did you get this job?
Well, so Madrona is an early stage venture capital firm in Seattle. Wonderful, wonderful firm. They now actually do all stages of investing. But at the time they were early stage focused firm, and it was a very small partnership still. There were, 5, 6 partners, handful of admin staff, a CFO, and historically they only had one junior person, one associate. And I think I was maybe the 4th or 5th one that they'd ever had. And everybody before me had come from various non-financial backgrounds. And I think after a string of those, they're like, these people are great and they're amazing. They go on to do amazing things. But none of us really know anything about financial modeling and financial stuff. Maybe our next associate, we should bring somebody on from the investment banking world who not that you need to do a lot of financial modeling in the early stage venture land, but exits, cap tables, all that stuff, somebody who can do the Excel around here. And so they were recruiting for somebody who was interested in early stage VC.
And you found this job posting on LinkedIn, or how did you?
No, a recruiter. They were using headhunters. Yeah. And so a headhunter back from when I was in banking, that I had all the headhunters I ever met with there, I was like, yo, I want to do venture capital. Right. If you out of private equity, okay, whatever, but I really want to do venture capital. If you ever have a VC job, call me. And so women called me, and that's how I got hooked up. I'd already left banking. I'd gone to the Wall Street Journal at this point. I was working on a business strategy role at Dow Jones at the Wall Street Journal, which is a really fun experience, but I only did that for a year and then joined Madrona.
Yeah. So the journey really prepped you for your next chapter, for the Acquired chapter. Really. Totally.
Yeah. This is totally. Amazing. It's everything is the famous Steve Jobs speech. You can only connect the dots looking backwards, but looking backwards, from Ed's class to, to Madrona to Stardex to like all this, it all led to Acquired. But at the time was a seemingly random set of things that, if anything, was just going to lead to being a full-time venture capitalist.
Yeah. The final section of our podcast is top three, where the guest recommends his favorite books, podcasts, and so forth. So let's start from your favorite books. Top three from David Rosenthal.
I should have prepared here. It's hard to pick just three. So one thing we read, and I particularly read a lot of nonfiction books, histories for acquired research, a lot of books. There are a lot of great ones out, like Shoe Dog's amazing, so many good ones out there. But I actually think fiction reading is underappreciated. So I also read a lot of fiction, less so these days with the 2-year-old. I don't have as much time for it, but I love reading fiction. So I'll go with some fiction recommendations. It's, an oldie but goodie that lots of people say, but the Foundation series from Isaac Asimov, really anything by Asimov is just so good. And Foundation particularly, when you think about the time and the context in which this stuff was written, and you're just like, oh my God, he was writing this stuff in the 50s, earlier even, and like it just envisioned this whole new world.
Do you know he was a great chemist?
I did know that. Yeah, totally.
Fun fact.
Totally.
He even wrote a short history of chemistry.
Really? Yeah. I gotta find that. I haven't read that. Yeah. I think I have read every piece of fiction he has written. So like Foundation series, the Empire series, the Robot series, which all tie together too, which is super cool. All of his short stories. So good. Are you also a big fan?
I'm not as big, but when I started learning chemistry, my dad is a fan, so he gave me his book on chemistry.
Amazing.
That's how I know.
I'll have to find that and read that. That's super cool.
And sort of another fun fact is my grandma's last name is the same as Zemo. So wow. It's just a namesake, but I don't know. Just a fun fact.
Super cool. Super cool. Can't recommend. He's always my go-to. And then fantasy, another trope, but I'd say Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, on the fantasy side, just like so great. And as a kid, actually, I was not into fantasy at all, not into Tolkien. Like I tried reading Lord of the Rings. I was like, this is boring and terrible. But then as an adult, I'm like, I think what I love about, both fantasy and sci-fi is like you can envision, other worlds and their imaginations of the future and like other, and like, that's cool, or alternate reality. But like, also like the best written ones, like those, like the characters, I feel like you can learn. I feel like I learned so much about human nature from reading these characters. Anyway, so there's those.
You can learn a lot. That's kind of a paradox, but you can learn a lot about business by reading fiction, not versus nonfiction, which is really popular these days. Yeah,
totally. Mm-hmm. Another joint recommendation for number 3 is Fitzgerald and Steinbeck. The two of them are just like, F. Scott Fitzgerald, the Princeton connection. Of course, how could you not love? But like, just so great. And then Steinbeck too. Again, through this lens for both of those of like learning about human nature through reading literature, like their works. I'm blanking on the one with Cain and Abel by Steinbeck.
I will not be able to help.
Anyway, yeah, those are my off the cuff ones. Read more literature of all types, even if it's not good. Like fiction is a window into humanity.
Top 3 movies.
Ooh, top 3 movies. Okay, Godfather for sure up there. I don't know. This is all boring, but like Godfather, Star Wars, original Star Wars trilogy. What else? Recent, with my young daughter, we started watching Disney movies, and actually the relatively recent Disney animation movies are bangers. Like they're great. Moana, Encanto, Tangled, kind of as Pixar started like getting less good, like a lot of that DNA and aspiration went over to core Disney animation.
What happened to Pixar, you think? What's going on?
I think the original brain trust moved on for various reasons. It got older, and that was a lot of magic and
cornered resource.
Totally. Yeah. So I'm glad that's Hamilton's, as you know, example in 7 Powers. And I think also part of them coming to the end of their careers and with the acquisition was they, and particularly Ed Catmull, went and spent a lot of time with Disney Animation down in LA and reinvigorating that, and it absolutely worked. And it's Disney Animation has been firing on all cylinders. And I think just if I had to guess, if I had to diagnose as a natural consequence of that, them now leaving, being retired and moving on, and also the diverted attention. Pixar, it's still Pixar, they're still good, but it's, and they've been great. Inside Out's great, but like it used, every single Pixar movie was just, in a lot of ways, so like that's what we aspire to with Acquired. We want every single Acquired episode to be like those classic days of Pixar. It's like, you knew this was gonna be great. And I don't think you can say that anymore.
So they have this interesting sort of a kind of combo between business and creativity where they have to produce a sequel every year, and that gives them a right to produce an original movie every other year. And
technology too. I mean, Pixar's such a cool. It's the reason it was the first Acquired episode ever. It's like business, creativity, technology, all in one.
Creativity Inc. Your favorite documentaries?
Ooh, I watched so many of them for Acquired research. Like, I honestly don't know that I could pick just one. I got a good one. Miss Americana, Taylor Swift. It's the I think it's the, is that the one that came out during COVID? I think
it's on Netflix, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix. Yeah, and it's just like the window into Taylor. We did the episode on Taylor, and like, God, she's so incredible and so impressive, and but that what she is and what we realized is, like, for people like her in the entertainment industry, she is both a world-class entertainer and a world-class CEO. And you see that in the documentary. Like, she's not just a world-class talent. She's not just like, she could run, Apple. Like she could run, not that any of these companies, like, she has that caliber of business acumen, and she's an incredible recording artist. Like, and just a master of like a show and a spectacle. And Miss Americana like really captured that.
Your favorite YouTube channels, if any?
Oh yeah, I love YouTube. Doug DeMuro for sure. Resonant Arc, which is also a podcast. I mostly consume it in podcast form, but it's a classic video game book club. So they play through like old Final Fantasies and stuff and talk, like, do literary analysis of the story. So fun. Love those guys. Let's see, Mint Blitz, who's a Halo content creator. I love Halo. I still play Halo Infinite, which is back on the rise these days. They really, 343 is, and Microsoft is, they fumbled the ball hard, and then they've slowly rebuilt it. Let's see what else. And then just, tons for Acquired research. Agenometry does really great, semiconductor industry stuff. All like corporate YouTube channels are way underrated, especially for these big companies. You go watch keynotes, you go watch customer conferences, you can learn so much. YouTube is an amazing resource.
Your favorite business podcasts?
Ooh, favorite business podcasts. The usual suspects, all our friends, everybody else on the charts with us. We was the Colossus Network and Invest Like the Best, and Patrick, David Senra, founders, Paki and Mario with the podcast versions of their newsletters, Ben Thompson. Ben is really this interesting, super interesting on so many dimensions, but also like he's really melded newsletter and podcast together in a really interesting way. We did an episode with him late last year talking about this. Yep. What's cool about our little business creator ecosystem is like, it's there's so much room to run for all of us that like we're all friends. It's not a zero-sum game. It's the opposite of early stage venture capital. We're not fighting each other. Yeah. Like I talk about that. I do a standing monthly call with David Senra, and we always talk about, like, you could look at Founders and Acquired, his show Founders Podcast, and Acquired, and be like, we're competitors, but we're substitutes for one another. But that's not the case at all. Like, people who love Founders are going to love Acquired, and people who love Acquired are going to love Founders. And the bigger he becomes, the more of those people are going to discover Acquired. And the bigger we become, the more of those people are going to discover Founders and Invest Like the Best and, strategy and all this stuff. So like, that's been a really, really cool unintended consequence of all this stuff we're doing and building Acquired is we get to have these really great kind of comrades in arms doing this together with.
Your favorite restaurants in San Francisco Bay Area?
Oh, wow. Let's see. The Evia in Palo Alto and Kakari here in the city, basically the same restaurant. Incredible. The best like high elevated like Greek food I've ever had. Like just incredible. Have you ever been to either? Oh, you got to go. They're so good. I mean, it's expensive, but like I think that's my single favorite. And then in Noe Valley where we live, like Noe's, can I digress on San Francisco
Please.
for a minute here? Okay. San Francisco, during COVID, like many people, and especially many people in San Francisco, my wife and I were like, should we still live here? Should we leave? Should we go somewhere else? And given what Acquired is, and like, I don't know, I mean, she has a job. She works at San Francisco Valley here, so she's very tied to the city. But like, we were in reevaluation mode, and we literally thought about every single place in the world. Like, where could we live? And we spent months thinking about this. And we came back to, at the end of all of it, there is no place else in the whole entire world where we want to live except San Francisco and Noe Valley, specifically in San Francisco. There is nothing like this city and this place on so many dimensions. And, there's the obvious, there's the tech, there's the business stuff. Like, it's all here. It's always been here. It's always going to be here. People thought it all left during COVID, and now AI is happening and it's all here. OpenAI is in the mission. They're right over there. Like, it's all here. And there's just a network effect and like a snowball effect to this that happens. And San Francisco has always been this way. It's a gold rush town. This town was built on the gold rush. This is the modern gold rush. Like, there's no place else in the world besides the San Francisco Bay Area where in the DNA of the geography is this boom and bust cycle. And it's always going to happen. So this is the place to be. That's just the business career side of things. There's also like, so all this gets written and talked about San Francisco's in this doom loop and it's terrible here. And like, it's, you look out on the streets and it's carnage. And like, that is true in very specific parts of the city. Unfortunately, it's where all the hotels are and where all the conferences used to be. There are terrible problems in this city. Terrible, horrible, everything that is written, most of it is true. But it's so contained. And the rest of the city is this beautiful, idyllic place. So like Noe, where we live, it's like a small little village in the middle of one of the greatest cities in the world. It feels like when we lived in Palo Alto, like a small town, everybody knows each other. I know all the people who run the businesses. I know the owners of my local coffee shop. I know our kids play on the playgrounds. There's kids all over the place. There's a slow street on Sanchez Street that we all go walk down. Like, it's great. I literally can't imagine anything better. And we get to be in the middle of one of the greatest cities in the world. And almost none, I don't want to say none, but almost none of all the bad stuff that you hear about escapes this small little part of the city where all the hotels happen to be. So anyway, and then there's just like all the other stuff. You just go down the list, and this is my wife and I did, and we were like, the weather here is actually like probably the best in the world. Like, because the winters are amazing. Yeah. And the summers are amazing.
Summers are not hot, yeah.
You wear a hoodie year round here. You don't have 110 degree temperatures. Like, we don't have air conditioning. We don't need air conditioning, and it's just beautiful. It's gorgeous. Like, there's no more beautiful city in the world, I think, that just the natural beauty, the architecture. Anyway, all right, rant over. I love San Francisco.
Amazing. Your favorite quotes?
Oh boy.
We don't have to belong to someone. Maybe like some of the.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a really good one actually. That's important to both my wife and me, and as direct Princeton connection. So a couple years after we graduated, maybe I think you were probably there. Michael Lewis gave the baccalaureate address.
That was 2012.
Yeah, 2012.
Yeah.
Was that your graduate? Yeah. Okay. So
don't eat the last cookie.
Don't eat the last cookie. Exactly. Yeah. Don't eat the last cookie. And the corollary to that is you're lucky. And he sort of, he gave this speech, and like, especially, we were still relatively young, a couple years out of school.
Oh, you came for your fifth reunion. That makes sense.
I only watched it on YouTube. I wasn't there. But like, I just, I love Michael Lewis. He's an illustrious Princeton alum, like all this stuff. And so, I watched it, my wife and I watched it, and we were still at this point in our lives where like that speech I felt like was like tailored to me. I felt like I deserved it, I got into Princeton and I could slack at Princeton. Then I got an investment banking job. Then I got into venture capital. I was about to go to Stanford Business School. Like, I deserved it. I earned all this. And Michael's point in this speech is like, whether you deserve it or not is irrelevant. Whether you earned it or not is irrelevant. You got incredibly effing lucky to be here to do these things, because for every one of you, there's somebody out there who worked just as hard, if not harder, and deserves it just as much, if not more. Every single one of you. And so like, don't forget, like you can go through life pretending like you earned it. And like, A, you'd probably be wrong. And B, more importantly, you'd just be an asshole. And like, don't be an asshole. Like, you're lucky.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
You have a responsibility for those who were not as lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, in many ways. Thank you so much, David. This was really, really, really fun. And one last thing, another tradition we have is that the guest has a question to the audience.
Ooh.
It can be anything you would like. I mean,
we live in an amazing world, like where this stuff is possible. You can do what you're doing here. We're doing this now. I have the show, like we're, maybe a little bit riffing on the, like, you're lucky, the Michael Lewis thing. Like, nobody gave us permission to do this. Mm-hmm. We just did it. And everybody, all of you listening here too, like, you can do this too. Now, can I guarantee that you will have great success and that it'll be great? No, of course not. And, most people won't, but like, there are no gatekeepers anymore. You can have a podcast, you can have a YouTube channel, you can do whatever. Like, it's wide open and you don't need anybody's permission. And all you need is a little bit of free time and a cell phone, and like, if you think, if there's, if you're like, there's even a little bit of part of you that's like, oh, I wish I could do that. Or I wish just do it. Absolutely do it. I really doubt you will regret it. I can't promise you success, but you might get success, and like, it'll be worth it. And that's so different than 10, 20 years ago and the whole rest of human history. You needed a publisher to write a book. You needed to somehow get into television to be on TV or radio or whatever. Like, none of that exists anymore. You can just do it.
Mm-hmm. And the question to the audience is?
Oh, so yeah, if you want to do it, why are you not doing it?
Aha. And wonderful. Thank you so much, David. This was nFactorial Podcast, San Francisco edition. As usual, be so good, we cannot ignore you.
Oh, that was so great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for finding time.